The biggest women's liberator in history is the Lubavitcher Rebbe. No one put the woman on such a pedestal like the Rebbe did. Okay, I say when the Rebbe sent a couple on shlichus, he didn't send a man a shliach and the woman, the wife, to take care of his laundry. He sent a shliach and a shlucha, both equal, both on the same level, not one more important than the other. And the Rebbe constantly gave this over to his chassidim.
Welcome to Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Chana Weisberg, host of this podcast. Joining me today, we have a very special guest. Her name is Rebbe Bassie Garelik. She is one of the first of all the shluchim that were sent by the Rebbe way back in the 1950s, and she's a shlucha to Milan, Italy. Thank you so much for joining us,
My
Mrs.
pleasure.
Garelik.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so I want to start with hearing a little bit about your childhood and what life was like, because I understand you were born here in America.
Yes, I was born in Chicago. Actually, my parents were both from Russia. From Russia, they went to Palestine. My two older brothers were born there. Then they came to America. They were in New Jersey. Another brother and sister were born in New Jersey. And then the Chassidim in New York had asked my father to go to Chicago. And Chabad or Lubavitch, at the time it wasn't called Chabad, it was called Lubavitch. And they needed someone there in the Lubavitcher shul in Chicago. And that's where I was born in 1938. And my younger
Wow.
sister in 1942. She's 4 years younger than I am. We were there for about 4 years. And then the Rebbe in 1940, the Friedrich, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, came to America. And he told my father to move to Pittsburgh. And my father, obviously the family, and my father there in Pittsburgh started one of the first day schools in America. It was not the first, but one of the earliest. And obviously he started for boys. He called it Yeshiva Achei Temimim. And I, who was about 4 years old, was sent to public school. I
Mhm.
was in public school. In Pittsburgh, there were two other men that had beards. One was a Rebbe, a rabbi, that always stayed in his house. The other was a shochet,
Slaughters, right?
one that slaughters chicken. But he lived upstairs from the slaughterhouse, and so he just went up, down. He didn't have to. My father had a beard, and he walked the streets of Pittsburgh because he wanted to know the people. He was looking for children for the school and so on. So my friends in kindergarten, a man with a beard. Oh, he must be Santa Claus. No, my father's not Santa Claus. Who else has a beard? Santa Claus.
Right.
When I would walk in the street with him, people would practically fall out of their cars looking.
Really?
It was incredible. Now, I adored my father, but I was embarrassed to walk down the street with him because I got all this attention, people falling out of their cars looking at
Right.
us. Anyway, the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, was sending Bachrim boys to teach in the school. They were about 20, 22 years old. And I remember like today I'm 86 years old. So when I tell you
Wow.
then, all right, so I'm walking up Murray Avenue with this boy, Bacher, Rabbi David Edelman. And I look up at him and I say, Rabbi Edelman, aren't you ashamed to walk in the street with your beard? And he looks down at me. He goes, ashamed? I'm proud of my beard. And I remember thinking then, this guy is so nuts. He doesn't have the brains to be ashamed. He's even proud. But the words he said and the way he said them have been so ingrained in my heart that till this day I see it as though it were happening now, which is one of
Mm,
the things that I tell my students, my son, don't preach when you want to teach a lesson.
mm,
Practice it. Be an
mm.
example because this was incredible. Okay, I was in public
What
school.
So, yeah, I wanna hear, like, what was life like for you as a girl growing up in such like, did you feel different than
Wait a second,
everybody? Did you
that's what I'm
Yeah,
telling you.
okay.
So, I was in public school till 3rd grade, and obviously, the fact that we were Shomer Shabbos, that we kept Shabbos and so on, wasn't very common. There were others,
Mm,
there were, but not so much in the street. Okay.
mhm.
Anyway, when I was in early in I did 3rd grade, my father told the Rebbe, he says, "I have no place for my daughter to learn." So the Rebbe said to him then, "Open up the school also for girls, and when
Mm.
you'll have enough, then you'll divide them." So I always say I was the first girl in a boys' school.
Right.
Hey, so that and the truth of the matter is I was a big tomboy. I didn't like playing with the girls. I much more, preferred the girls were such truth. I always wanted to be a boy, and what cured me of that was when I came to the realization that if I'm a boy, I'm gonna have to marry a girl. Forget it. But I
Wow.
I I'll tell you, I'd say this, especially to my girl, because I want them to feel I was very comfortable with boys. I didn't have a problem with
Mm.
it. It was natural. It was normal. It was just part of everything else. And so, all right, when I was 12 years old, when I finished, I did half of 8th grade, only half a year. My parents sent me to New York.
What were there any girls in your class? Or you were the only girl?
No, no, no. I was not the only girl. I was the first
Mhm,
girl, but not the only girl. Um, there were another 2, 3 girls in the beginning. After about a year or so, there were 8, 9, 10 girls. And what my father did was for the English studies, we were together with the boys. And then for
mhm.
Hebrew, I remember my sister, my older sister was 8 years older than I am. So when she came back to Pittsburgh, when she finished Beis Yaakov, she also went to Beis Yaakov. When
She
she
went to
finished
Bassie Garelik where? In New
in
York?
New York,
New York,
in Williamsburg, this was the
Williamsburg.
first Beis Yaakov with Rebbe Kaplan on South
Mm,
8th Street. Oh yeah, this was I adored it. I absolutely adored it. Anyway, she came back and she taught us. I remember us being a class of about 8, 10 girls, not more, but from different classes, from different
mhm,
grades. And we
mhm.
were all put together and we studied there. Today, Kanine Pittsburgh has a beautiful, big school for girls or boys, etc. But at the time, it was the beginning. And to us, it was natural. This is what was
Mhm,
happening. We didn't know of anything else. This was what was happening. As a matter of fact, I say when I was 12, my parents already sent me to New York to Beis Yaakov. And you'll excuse me, but New Yorkers are very provincial. They think that the whole, at least at then, okay, now the world is different. But then, New York was New York, outside of New York. And my younger sister, who was 4 years younger and came 4 years after me, she was able to convince the girls there that in Pittsburgh, only the mayor had a car. Everybody else went to the horse and wagon, and they believed it.
Wow.
But with me,
Wow.
it was they couldn't believe that out of town, for instance, that my mother covered her hair, that my father
Mm,
had a beard. So these things that in Pittsburgh were a liability, when I came to Beishakov, I was 10 kilos, 10 meters higher because
mm,
your mother covers her hair, your father has a beard. They couldn't believe it.
mm.
I had beautiful years in Beishakov. I loved it. And after
Wh
5
what was it like to leave home so young?
To me, it was natural for this reason. My older brothers, see, my oldest brother was 12 years older than I am, and
Mm,
my second brother is 10, 11 years older. They were always away in yeshiva. So to me, this was a normal thing. You go away to yeshiva. Boys go
mm,
to yeshiva. Girls, my sister, who was 8 years older than I am, also went. So this was a natural part of life.
mhm,
I understood very well when I finished 8th grade that I could not go to a public high school. There was
mhm,
if I'd even ask for it. I didn't think of it. Like I said, when you live it, it's natural. It's part of
mhm,
life, and that's what it was. My whole life of being a Lubavitcher, of being a Chassidic, of um, being the Rebbe's emissary. This was natural.
mhm.
This was my life. This was what I
It seems
taught my
like it
parents.
it was it was natural for you to be different. It was natural for
Yes,
you
yes,
to
yes,
be
yes.
very
It
different
was
than everyone around you,
absolutely,
and you
absolutely.
never felt like you needed to, like, fit in. Like,
You
what
know
do you
what?
say to gr
I haven't thought about it so much, but I can tell you this. I always say that I was very lucky that I was always surrounded by smart, good people that loved me. My
Mm,
parents. When I went to Beis Yaakov, I say I was 12 years old. My Menahelis, Rebbe Kaplan, was a dream.
mm,
The Rebbe.
mm,
I mean, but I'll tell you the things about it, but you'll see the relationship and there was something incredible. And my husband, I
mm.
had an extraordinary husband.
We're gonna get to all of that. We're gonna get
No,
to
but
all of those
so I
things.
was very
Yes.
lucky in that even when I was different from everyone, like when I was in
Right.
Pittsburgh, but I was supported by so much
Mm,
goodness and love that I didn't suffer. I didn't feel like
mm.
I was being deprived of something.
Do you think that that's the key today for, so many teenagers and children in general and people in general feel like it's so hard to be different than everybody, to uphold values that are different than everybody. What's the secret to that?
I, again, I say you have to be an example for your children,
Mhm,
but not an example that, oh, see, do like I. No, 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 no. You
mhm,
have to live it.
mhm,
And also, don't preach. No one wants to be preached to, and there's no point to it. If someone sees you living something and enjoying it and living it peacefully, they're going to want to also. And if you're
mhm,
not, if you're going to make it heavy, a burden, it's going to be a
mhm,
burden to them as well.
mhm,
I never ever felt that being different was a burden to me because I felt so much. I didn't think about it then. I'm trying to analyze
right,
it. At the time, I didn't realize it was. I just know that I knew I was different. I knew we kept Shabbos, not everybody did. I knew that I couldn't eat everything that everybody else did, but there was so much support in back of me
mhm,
that I never felt abandoned. I never felt that I was, and that support, like I said before, I had it from my parents as a young child. I had it from Rebbe Kaplan when I was in the seminary. My husband, absolutely, and of course, above it all was the Rebbe. The
mhm,
Rebbe, again, my parents never, never preached. I don't know if you're. Let me tell you an example. I'm going back to when I was 8 years old. This is in 1946, 47. The Lubavitchers had come out of Russia as Polish students. You probably know that whole story. But they were still refugees, and they were in Paris. And the previous Rebbe wanted to send two Bochrim to give them some encouragement. One of the boys was my older brother. My
mhm,
mother did not want my brother to go because in those days going to yeshiva wasn't very common. He was in yeshiva, he never appeared. And she was afraid going to Europe then meant not a week, but a half a year because you went by
mhm,
boat and
mhm,
be there. And she was afraid he wouldn't go back to yeshiva when he comes back, and he didn't have
mhm.
smicha yet. And she thought that someone else had decided who the boys should be. Let him send his son. Why is he sending my son? I remember hearing this from my parents.
Right.
All right, so the scene I want to describe to you. My father says to my mother, let's call New York and find out who is sending them. And the telephone, I told you, 8 years old. I'm on the floor with the radio listening to the Lone Ranger. My mother she doesn't want to send him. My father is at the telephone. In those days, the telephone was like this. Can you imagine? All right. He says, let's see who's sending them. He, he's talking to the Rebbe secretary, and then he turns to my mother and he says, the Rebbe is sending them. How
Mhm.
long does it take for when you touch the switch, the light goes on? That's exactly how long it took for my mother to stop crying. She's preparing my brother to go. I was eight
Mhm.
years old. They weren't performing for me. They didn't even see that I was there. I mean, they saw, but they didn't make a big change. I can't forget that scene. I can't forget how those three words, it, it's kommt von Rebbe. It was the Rebbe that chose them. And for
Mhm.
my mother, that was enough. Okay.
Did you
Th-
did you ever see them experiencing hardship in being the only ones there in Pittsburgh or being
If they
sent
did, they
there?
didn't tell it to me. Okay.
Right?
Also, my parents um, were never wealthy. And so and we never felt it. It never
Mm,
occurred to me that we weren't. If you would ask me, I never heard the word no. You know,
Mm,
we can't afford. I never heard that.
mm,
And we lived the way we lived. What we
mm,
had, and I don't ever remember being. I don't ever remember thinking to myself, "Oh, I wish we had more money." It never occurred to me that we didn't have.
mm.
It was, it was just very natural. Uh, I don't know. I don't know
Right.
how to explain it.
Interesting, interesting.
Yes,
So
I
so I know after you finished high school, I think you wanted to go to college at one point. What happened there?
I finished high school. I was 16. I finished so I was going to go to seminary in New York, and that was my fifth year in New York. But I didn't have anything special. My parents didn't tell me I should look for a job or anything like that. I figured I'll go to university. So I I lived in Williamsburg in an apartment with four girls, and all my friends from class lived around by. So I used to go to my friends' houses for kiddies or for Chavdal or for whatever. And one of my friends, when her brother, who was going to Torah Vodaas Yeshiva, you want to go to university? You can't go to university. Why can't I go to the Rebbe? Wouldn't ask the Rebbe. I said, I'm going to ask the Rebbe such a foolish question. Leave me alone. He
Mm,
didn't leave me alone. Okay, so what did I do? I wrote my father a letter, and I wrote, my parents had no objections to me going to university. I want to go to university, but this guy is driving me crazy. I should ask the Rebbe. I don't think that it's something to ask the Rebbe. However, I do want the Rebbe to lead me in my life. So I don't know if it's something I should ask him or not.
and this was already our Rebbe. This is not the Frierdiker Rebbe. This is not
This
the
is this
previous
is
Rebbe. This
the
is our
Rebbe,
Rebbe.
the Rebbe. And a short time later, my father never answered me. A short time later, I get a letter, and I wrote to my father in Yiddish. To my father didn't speak. I wrote to my father in Yiddish. I get an English letter from the Rebbe with a
Mhm,
whole explanation about saying that it's such short years since the Shoah. We lost so many people. Each one of us has not just the obligation to do what we have to do, but we have to do what they had to do, make up for
mhm,
those that are lost. So we don't, he says, there's no time to go to university. There is so much
mhm,
you have to do. And he says, and I hope you will do this, not as you said to your father because you want to be guided by me, but because it is a reflection of your own ideas. And I
mhm.
hope you will also have influence on your friends. I'm looking at this and I think, how does he know? I told my father. How does he know I wanted? I couldn't figure out what's going on. I asked my father. What did my father do? He took my letter and sent it to the Rebbe. He didn't
Wow.
ask everything. He sent my letter to the Rebbe. I think he wanted the Rebbe to see my feelings for the Rebbe. I want the Rebbe
Right,
to lead me in my life. And if this is what
right.
if he doesn't want me to do this, I'm not going to do it. And if he is asking to it, then okay, then I'll do. All right.
It's
So,
interesting that the Rebbe wrote that he doesn't want you to do it just because the Rebbe says no, but he
yes.
wants you to do it
Oh,
because you wanna do it. Yeah. That those
he,
values should
he,
be your
he he's
own, not
incredible, incredible the way he wrote. There's another letter that I got much, much later once when I was in Italy already. I don't know, should I jump from one to the other? You
well,
tell me.
sure, let's move ahead. Let's move ahead to your, like, a 20-year-old girl, young girl, and you're off to on shlichus
Well,
to Milan.
you know, and I don't want to diminish the Mesiras Nefesh, how should I say Mesiras?
Self-sacrifice?
The what?
The self-sacrifice?
The self-sacrifice that people have for Shlichus. I don't want to minimize that. But I must say, for myself, I had no Mesiras Nefesh. It was no sacrifice. It would have taken a sacrifice not to go on Shlichus, not to be
Mm,
sent by the Rebbe. It was my
mm.
dream. I grew up on
Why
it
is that? Like, why is that?
because to
You're a
me,
20-year-old girl who's
all
an
right,
American
all right, now
girl.
I'm going to shock you. And I'm going to shock
Yeah.
you. When I would talk to my friends, everyone in Beis Yaakov knew I was a Lubavitcher. Everybody knew it. When we would talk about marriage, girls, 17, 16, 17, who do you want to marry? Blah, 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 blah. I used to say, I don't want to be number one by my husband. I want to be number two. The Rebbe has to be number one. Okay? To
Mm.
me, this was natural and normal. And I must tell you, just as my husband and I had a magnificent, magnificent relationship. And he was a Russian boy, and I was an American girl. And the glue that kept us so close and always on the same page was Rebbe. Was
Mm.
Rebbe. He, the Rebbe, was number one. That it, I mean, of
You
course,
you mean you mean the ideals of the Rebbe, the way
not
that
just the ideals, the directives.
the
If the Rebbe wants us
directives.
to do this, this is what we'll do. And if the Rebbe wants us to do that, that's what we'll do. It's that it shouldn't be no,
So
I do
you
and you don't. No, no, we were always on the same page with whatever it was that had to do with the Rebbe. That's it. But
so
again, I saw, I lived this. I lived this,
right.
and to me, again, in those days, going out on, when my husband proposed to me, truthfully, I didn't know him at all, hardly, and only much, much later I found out. He was among those Lubavitchers that came out of Russia as Polish citizens and they went there to Israel, started Kfar Chabad. Near Kfar Chabad, there was a missionary because these were the early days, and there was a lot of they had very fertile ground. So my
Mm.
husband, who was about 18, 19-year-old bocher with another friend, they got hold of this missionary. Don't ask me what they did because I don't know. My husband was put into jail in Eretz Yisrael.
Oh, wow.
Well, he
Wow.
was being punished for whatever he did. He was in jail for 3 days. He had a police record. And because he
Mm.
had a police record, he couldn't get a visa to America. When all his friends, when he was 19, 20, all his friends got visas and came to America to be by the Rebbe, he couldn't come. And for
Mm.
3 years, he went from office to office, from politician to politician. He didn't stop, he didn't rest until he was able to get a visa to America. So once he got there, he was 23. Once he got there,
Mm.
he didn't want to move 2 steps away from the Rebbe.
Mm.
I knew nothing of this. Okay, we go out, and he proposes to me. I only knew him a week, and he proposes to me. I said,
Wow.
I said, I have to ask the Rebbe. I had no idea what to say. He says, yeah, but where do you want to live after you get married? Because at that time I was living in Pittsburgh, and he wanted to make it very clear to me that he is not going to move to Pittsburgh.
Mm.
I knew nothing of this. He says, but where do you want to live after you get married? I said, wherever the Rebbe will send us,
Mm.
which was to me the most natural answer. Later on, because at the moment he didn't, later on he told me, when you answered me like that, had you thrown a bucket of ice water on me, you couldn't have shocked me more. To hear
Mm.
an American girl in 1957, 58 say, wherever the Rebbe will send it, he was floored. He says, yes, but the Rebbe isn't sending. I mean, and the Rebbe wasn't yet really sending,
Mhm.
where would you like? I said, well, I understand that wherever husband, the wife follows the husband. But
Mhm.
because he wanted to make it very clear to me, he wasn't going to move 2 steps away from the Rebbe.
Mm.
But I didn't know it. Thank goodness I didn't know that. Had I known that, I probably wouldn't have gone out with him even. Okay. When we were already engaged, I wrote to the Rebbe 3 times. Send us wherever you want. Send us wherever you want. Send us wherever you want. And I never got an answer from the Rebbe. But the Rebbe's secretary kept calling my husband and telling him he should get his passport in order, his passport in order, his passport. Oh, you're saying, hey, well, why does he need a passport? You don't need a passport in the United States. Obviously, if
Mm.
anything, will be sent who knows where. But we've got no clue to anything. Just he should get his passport. No. Okay, we got married, and the secretary always, by the way, it was never known. By the way, by the way, he just told him, get your things in order. By the way, if you want to know where you'll be sent, you'll be sent to Europe. Oh, Europe,
Mm.
where? Um, well, let's say Italy. He made it sound like very. Before this, though, I had said to my husband, I said, if we're going to be sent somewhere, my parents hardly know you. Come home a little bit. so they can get
Mm.
to know you. No, 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 no. He says, if we're going to be sent somewhere, I'm not moving away from the Rebbe. You go home
Mm.
for 3 weeks. Now when people talk, people talk about Shana Rishona, the first year of marriage. According to the law, the first year of marriage you can't send them to the army. The first year of marriage you can't. That the husband and wife have to be together. I say, yeah, the first year of marriage for 3 weeks he sent me home. Okay, okay. So I was home. He would call me every day, and he tells me, by the way, I met Rabbi Chedikov, and he tells me this: we'll be being sent to Italy. Okay,
Mm.
so I go, I tell my father, he was taking care of some books for the yeshiva. I say, Pa, if you want to know, we're going to Italy. Okay, if the Rebbe sending you, go. I figure, okay, let me
Mm.
see if I get a rise out of my mother. I mean, because then saying Italy was like today's, I like to say it's like saying today the Congo, but it's not, because today you go to the Congo easier than then you went to Italy.
Right. Right.
Excuse me. So I go into my mother. I say, Ma, the Rebbe is sending us to Italy. If the Rebbe is sending, go. Okay,
Wow.
this is what I grew up with. They didn't even blink an eye. All right.
Mm.
Okay. So at the same time, Rabbi Yitzchak Groner, was being sent to Australia. And it was almost like a twin shlichutz. And, to Australia and to Milan. It was the end of August. And we were there already 8 months, imagine, away from the Rebbe, 8 months. I sent a telegram to the Rebbe asking for permission for him to come to New York. And the Rebbe's answer: if he has his wife's full permission,
Mm.
full consent, if he has his wife's full consent, I was 20 and he was 26, 27.
Mm.
He needed my full consent. And if he has a visa to come back, bivracha, he has a bracha to come. I got the answer on a Shabbos morning. I ran to shul quickly. He should get the answer as soon as possible. So I tell him, okay, now you have to get my permission. Nah, he says, you sent the telegram. I have your permission. Obviously, I was ridiculous.
Right.
I said,
I
but you don't have a visa to come back. He says, you're not reading it properly. It says there, and a visa and a return visa is assured. I read it with a question mark. He read it with an
mm.
exclamation mark.
Mm.
So I couldn't resist that. It was just on the spot, on the spot. He left. He went to New York. He went to New York, and the Rebbe's secretary asked him, "Oh, you're here. Nice. You have a visa to go back?" He said, "Yeah, she's taking care of it there. I was taking care of it in Milan to make sure you should have a visa." Ah, he says, "It's easy to go when you have who takes care of things for you." This was Sunday. Tuesday, he went into the Rebbe on Yechidut. My husband never spoke, though. The Rebbe could ask him whatever he wanted, he wouldn't speak. So, when he went in, the Rebbe said to him, "Write and describe the relationship between you and your wife."
Mm.
I have challenged a lot of audiences. I haven't met another man or woman who that ever asked for a description of their relationship. Okay, Thursday, my husband went in. He says he wrote a whole page, and I was too proud to ask him what he wrote, so I have no idea. But he said to me, "I'll tell you the last line because the Rebbe fixed it." He wrote, "Maybe I should not have been so profuse in her praise. Maybe I should not," the Rebbe crossed out not, "have been
Mm.
so profuse," the Rebbe underlined, "in her praise."
Mm.
This was Thursday. Sunday, again, by the way, the secretary meets my husband and says, "Oh, you're going home?" "Yes." "Are you bringing your wife a present?" "Yes." "What are you bringing her?" "Cake." There was no kashrus in Milano, nothing. And and that was more than enough for me. So the secretary smiles and he says, "Well, cake, she should eat in good health, but maybe get her something gold. Okay.
Mm.
What do you think she would like? He didn't have too much imagination in jewelry, my husband. He said, a watch. He had already got me, I don't know. Okay. And the secretary says, do you mind if I help you choose it? Husband says, fine, with pleasure. Okay. It was Sunday. The stores were closed. But Rabbi Simpson had started dealing in jewelry then. So they called him up and they asked him if he'd bring a suitcase of watches to the Mercus office in 770. And he did. And there was my husband and Mary Simpson and maybe the secretary, whoever. Yeah, oh, of course, Rabbi Chadakov. And everybody said what they thought. And then Rabbi Chadakov took all the watches and brought them into the Rebbe.
Mm.
When my husband saw this, he nearly fainted. He didn't realize it was all coming from the Rebbe.
Mm.
The Rebbe said, if there's time, the face of this with the band of this. And if there isn't time, then this one. And then, this was already the beginning of Chodesh Elul, the Rebbe sent out a machzer for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. They had just printed them that year or the year before. He says, and this is my present to her.
Mm. Wow. Why do you think the Rebbe got involved with what kind of present your husband should get you?
Okay, I can't answer that question because how can I possibly know what the Rebbe was thinking? But what I will say this, and I have a seminary of girls, and I talk to them a lot about this. The biggest women's liberator in history is the Lubavitcher Rebbe. No one put the woman on such a pedestal like the Rebbe did. Okay, I say when the Rebbe sent a couple on shlichus, he didn't send a man a shliach and the woman, the wife, to take care of his laundry. He sent a
Mm.
shliach and a shlucha, both equal, both on the same level, not one more important than the other. And the Rebbe constantly gave this over to his chassidim. Can you imagine how my husband came home with that watch? Can you imagine? Had I asked him for the moon, he would have walked straight up to get it. Why?
Mm.
Because the Rebbe put the woman on such a pedestal that the man, when they would have the conventions for the women, how many husbands were left home with children, with babies, with whatever it was? Did one of them complain and say, no, you can't go? They wouldn't dare. Are you
Mm.
kidding? This was the Rebbe's convention for the women. Everything like that. And this was the Rebbe's attitude to everything. The Rebbe, he lifted, he gave the man his importance also. But I love the example that like the women's lib. In the beginning, oh, women's lib, it was really, they're right. The only one thing that I could agree with him on was equal work, equal pay. I couldn't stand the idea either of a woman doing the same job as a man and getting half because she's a woman, obviously. But that wasn't what they were fighting for. And 30 years ago, in 1990, I read an article in Newsweek, The Failure of Feminism. And they
Mm.
write, feminism didn't liberate the woman, it liberated the man. Now he doesn't have to take care of the woman. Let her take care of
Mm.
herself. Okay?
Mm.
The Rebbe, he said, feminism tried to turn women into men. We women, al pitera, have such a, we're so privileged. If we would only realize how privileged we are. You know, even, even when I think about all the laws, between husband and wife and so on and so forth, you think, imagine if it was the opposite. Imagine if the relationship between husband and wife depended on the man's state of being and not on the woman's state of being.
Mm.
But now that it's on the woman, who appreciates it? Who thinks of it? Whoa, haha, they're dependent on us. It's the way. It's the
Mhm.
way. What's happening with me?
Mhm.
Just very. Again, I don't know if this is it,
Right.
but it just.
No, what strikes me though with the Rebbe saying that and even being so involved with deciding what kind of watch and what kind of band is a certain I mean, what you're saying about women in general is very true about the Rebbe's attitude towards women, but it also strikes me that there was some kind of intention as far as your personal relationship with you and your husband and how and saying something about that. I read that you described your marriage or your marriage was described as a marriage of love. And
Where
I
was
w
my
I wanna
marriage? Where was this described?
that you once said that people said that your marriage was a
It
marriage of
is.
love, that people said that, everyone looked at you and they could see just the way that you were looking at each other.
And the truth
That
of the matter is we never looked at each other. We didn't.
right,
We
right,
were
right,
very careful in public.
for sure.
We weren't only careful in public, we were careful with our children as well. We never
Mm,
did it. It just you know what? After I was getting the Nichum Avelim, how should I say, the, letters of after my husband,
comfort after
I hate
mhm,
to say the word, okay?
after you
Again, I
passed
I mean,
on.
every one of they would talk about this. One writes, "Oh, he taught our husband," one of the women's Orshel, "He taught our husbands how to respect the wives." What did he do? I mean, he was always respectful, but I was respectful, but we never did anything or said anything. Anyway, I had 2 girls, one from Rome and one from Bologna, that lived in our house because they went to our schools. They were in schools where they were and well, of course, now they're married there with their bubbas there. No. I met one of them afterwards. I say, "Honey, why are you lived in our house so many years? What did you ever see anything between my husband and me?" She goes, "Mora," I was Morato. "Mora, when you would wash the dishes and he would dry them." They felt like they were intruding. I couldn't figure it out.
Wow.
And it was to us it was, "No, I'm washing, he's drying, finish." Like it does Mara, when you would wash the dishes and he would dry them.
Well, it sounds like a very, a very strong relationship, a partnership.
We did, we did. We had a very s and you know what? And I love to tell this to my girls as well. I said, "When I was a girl, I wanted a Chassidic husband, but I wanted a romantic husband. But I wanted a Chassidic husband." No. They go, "I understood that it's more important to have a Chassidic husband." I said, "Girls, you don't have to choose. You can get them both in one."
Mm.
Okay. And my daughter yells at me. She's one of my Ma, stop talking about Tati. You're just giving them hope. They're never going to meet someone like him anyway. They're just going to be disappointed. I said, Sush, they have to know that it exists. They have to know. I tell them my shtick. The Shulchan Aruch is romantic. When
Hmm.
I say that to the married women,
The Shulchan Aruch is the code of Jewish law.
the
Yes.
Shulchan Aruch is the code of Jewish law, and it's full of this you might and this you may not. This you may and you may not. This yes, this no. And it's romantic.
How
Eh,
so? How do
How
you see
so?
that?
Oh, how so? All right. First of all, um, we're talking about the laws between a husband and wife. I never say between a man and a woman because there are no laws between a man and woman. Man and woman are
Mm,
separate, finished. Laws between the behavior of a husband and wife. I was once asked at a convention with your other, this was in London. In London, they have a very interesting thing. This is not Chabad in London. You cannot get married unless you can bring to the rabbi a certificate that you learned with a teacher these laws of marriage.
mm,
So from that group, when they heard the Chabad, Lubavitch were married, they wanted to hear how we approach this subject. So one of the women got up and asked, "How do you explain to a young couple in love that for half of every month they can't have any physical relationship?" Someone else was supposed to answer that question, but these 4 women on the panel pointed to me and said, "You answer that one." I said, "The Torah doesn't say that you love each other for 2 weeks and 2 weeks you don't love each other. The Torah says you love each other all the time. But
mhm,
for 2 weeks, you can show this love physically, and for 2 weeks, you have to think of other ways to show this love."
mm,
I said, "Physical show of love, everybody knows how to do that. Everybody does that, and it's very satisfying up to a certain point." I said, "But this second time, when you have to find other ways to show your love, what's going to make my husband happy may not make your husband happy. I have to think,
mm,
how can I make my husband happy without
mhm,
physicals?"
mm,
And there, and you discover that there are many, many ways. And those ways, I said, by us, marriage is for life. I said,
Mm,
and these ways that we show our love are the bridges that we build, that we cross the rest of our lives with our husbands.
mm,
So I go in, the Shulchan Aruch is romantic. The Code of
mm.
Laws, what's romantic about it?
How do you think that your husband learned that? Like, he was a Russian boy who was not,
He was a very
very
good
and very
student.
different and
He
very
was a
different than you.
very good student.
Good student of what? Of the Rebbe who taught him, like,
No,
that
no.
say your
No. First of all, he was a very a person full of feelings. He was smart and good,
Mhm,
okay? And when I had no problem showing my he responded very much to it, and he
mm,
enjoyed it, and he liked
mhm,
it, and he responded to it, and it just grew. It just grew between, but it was always private. It was all we never. I remember even once teasingly we were walking in the street, and there was a couple in front of us, Italian. Huh? I say they were holding hands. I said, "Ah, you see, that's the way to go." He says, "Yeah. How does he treat her at home?"
yeah, that's true,
Okay, okay.
right,
I didn't say, yeah, well, obviously I was teasing. I wasn't just, no, he was a very good student. He learned very well.
mhm,
And my
mhm,
husband, like I said, a Russian boy, he never, um, he didn't know who Cinderella was, and he never saw a movie, and he didn't read books. So
mm.
everything he said or did was genuine, absolutely genuine.
Wa
Um,
was there ever a clash in culture between you? Like, you were American, he was Russian,
nothing.
even
Like,
nothing?
what could have been? I don't know. I can't remember a time of any that we shouldn't have been on the same page.
Mm,
We were always on the
mhm,
same page, everything. As a
mhm.
matter of fact, when we went to Italy, that June, we started Gan Yisrael in Italy.
In Italy, mhm,
In Italy. We were married a year and a half. At the Fabrengen, at the union of all the Lubavitchers, where the Rebbe was talking, the Rebbe at that Fabrengen said, today in Milan, in Italy, the first Gan Yisrael, the first camp, was established by a couple, a Russian boy and an American girl
mm,
that met, and it was a little bit strange, that the Rebbe highlighted this Russian boy, American girl. That's why. And when the Rebbe asked me, and it was shortly after this, my husband went. This was in July, and in August, my husband went to New York, and that was when the Rebbe asked him to. I thought to myself, maybe the Rebbe wanted to see this Russian boy in America. Do they have a common language? Do
mm,
they, how do they communicate? What's going on there? But this is I'm saying from my head. I have no idea
mhm,
why the Rebbe asked, but it was also very strange that he highlighted this different. That
mhm.
and I mean, every husband and wife. The mere fact that he's masculine, she's feminine, is enough to be a problem.
Right,
Okay, we know
right.
that. All right.
We're
But here
different,
that he
right?
highlighted a Russian boy and a so I thought maybe he wanted to see if we had a common language. I don't know exactly what to tell you.
When you came to Milan, was there any difficulties in terms of, like, what were the hardships of coming there
All right,
as an American girl?
I'll tell you. It wasn't so much about America. Number one, we came there December 1st, 1958, and you have to understand the people that the people in our congregation were all survivors.
Mm,
The war was over in 45. This was 58. So was it 13, 14 years later? To them, the milchama, the war, and I, this silly I turned 20 in Italy.
mm, wow, so young,
We
unbelievable.
got there today, and tomorrow was my birthday. We got there. Yutis Kislev, Chaf Aleph was my. We got to the 19th of the kiss, and 21. I turned 20. When they
Mm,
would say the war, silly American would go, the First World War, the Second World War, this war, that war.
mm,
I learned to keep my mouth shut.
mm,
The war.
mhm,
And to them, this was a new world. The way they lived before the war in the shtetl, in the cities where they lived, that was one way of living. And now this was a different world. You couldn't live that
Mm.
way. And I didn't realize this at the time, but with the time I realized we had to show them that you can be just as religious and an observant and everything now as then. But
Mm.
you had to understand them. And this is
Right.
what took me a little bit about, for instance, before we left New York, Rabbi Chabad.org, the Rebbe secretary, said to me, start with a school. That way, your students will become your collaborators. I told you I
Mm.
turned 20 then. My collaborators. I thought I'll have to wait a lifetime for that. I couldn't figure out. But to me, to start a school was I was thinking that anyway. My father had started yeshiva in Pittsburgh. To us, that was our whole life. I didn't think other than that I would do that. But when I wanted to start school here, to them, I was the Rebbitzin. I was the rabbi's wife,
Mm.
the Rebbitzin. When they would call me Rebbitzin, I used to look to see who were they talking to because I couldn't let them report to me. But
Right.
anyway, when I wanted to start a school, a Rebbitzin doesn't make a school. A Rebbitzin makes chont. A Rebbitzin
Right.
makes kegel. This is what they knew about a Rebbitzin. They didn't know a Rebbitzin makes. Also, they didn't want that I should do something like on. They wanted to be modern. They wanted to be part of the world. They left that world. This is what we were
Right.
fighting for.
Sure.
This was our thing, and it took a few years. I started in my house. I had an empty living room. I started in the living room, and kindergarten. I started kindergarten. Everyone will send their kids to kindergarten, get the kids out of the house, no problem. Because when I
Right.
wanted to start first grade, that's when it was one of the advantages that we had. Advantage for people is that this was also a period of time. The Shah of Iran fell. The Persian Jews
Mm.
left.
Mm.
Gaddafi from Tripoli came, from Syria. These were all refugees, and they were
Mm.
happy to find a school that was small and
Mm.
intimate because their kids didn't know Italian. So this was a plus for us. It helped us. Right? It took time. It took time. It was slow. I remember once writing to the Rebbe, I feel like my neshama was sent down to this world just to knock on people's doors and hear them
Mm.
say no.
Right.
If this is what I'm supposed to do, no problem. I can do that. But it seems to me to be useless.
So hard. Yeah. Such dejection. Sure.
No answer from the Rebbe. I'm going back a step. Before we left New York, the Rebbe said to my husband, I heard there's a city near Milan of Hasidim that do not learn Hasidut. Okay. He was talking about the city of Lugano. It was a
Mm.
beautiful city, beautiful kehillah, very from people, very Chassidic. Right? They weren't not Chabad, and they weren't Chassidic. But they never invited my husband to come and learn with them. But the women invited me to come, Hanukkah or Purim, and every time I spoke, I would say a sikha.
A talk from the Rebbe.
So
Mhm.
one of the Rebbe's speaks, one of the Rebbe's speeches. So of course I was very proud of myself. I was learning Hasidus with the people in Lugano. Once they invited me for the Sunday. It wasn't Hanukkah or Purim, and they asked me to speak twice in the afternoon to the girls and in the evening to the women. So big shot me. I prepared two speeches so that if the girls come in the evening, they won't say they already heard it.
Mhm.
Okay. Did my speech in the afternoon to the girls. Perfect. I did my speech to the women in the evening. Perfect. I finished. Silence. And then the women say, talk some more. Talk some more. And when they said, talk some more, my mind
Uh,
went blank, which was
Wow.
strange because every Shabbat I was also saying these things, talking to the girls from Milan. Blank. Okay. I mean, I had spoken for about 40 minutes and then, all right, they're finished. I got on the train to come back home, which was about an hour ride, and I cried the whole way. I had no satisfaction out of the fact that I'd spoken in the afternoon. I had no satisfaction out of the fact that I spoke in the evening. All I could concentrate on was they asked for more, and I didn't have more to give them.
Mm.
For a couple of days, I went around in a daze. I couldn't find peace. Okay, I finally sat down. I wrote a letter to the Rebbe. And I wrote what had happened. And I finished it off with, when I was in Beis Yaakov, there were such smart girls in my class. If the Rebbe had sent one of those, she could have done
Mm.
so much more than I did. Here I got an answer. And it was so cute because then it writes, in answer to your letter and also your previous correspondence, which is where I wrote about knocking on the door, I was thinking,
Sure.
the Rebbe, when he got that, he said, "Wait, I'll wait for the next one." Then he said, "Okay, in answer to your letter and also to him, it seems." So the Rebbe first explains like this: in Chassidus, it talks about two types of planting. You can plant a field, you get a lot very quickly, but it's not worth that much. You plant a pardes, no, how do you say pardes?
A vineyard.
A vineyard or vineyards or pea trees or whatever. It takes many years for the fruits to grow, but once they grow, it's so much more precious. He says,
Mm.
so too in what we do. Sometimes in our actions, we do something and we see the results immediately, but they aren't always so great. Sometimes it takes much more time to see the results, but once we see them, we see how much more they are worth.
Mm.
Uh, and so what you are doing seems to fall in the second category. Then
Mm.
he writes, it seems from your letter as though you have doubts as to whether the one that sent you chose well. I
Mm.
don't think you think so, but if you do, I won't take it personally. When I read those words, I went crazy. I won't take it personally. He says, but being as I'm sure you are sure that the one that chose you chose well, continue with work, you must live, and so on and so forth. Okay. What a minute. It had such a way of communicating, of saying, okay. All right. Obviously, after that, well, things started to
What
pick
what did
up.
what did you take from that? What did you take from that about how you felt about yourself? Like, how did that impact the
It's,
way that you looked at
no, no, no.
yourself?
I liked how he said, I won't take it personally. To
Right.
me, it was like so personal. It
Mm.
was like so, it wasn't like a Rebbe to a subject. It was like a father to a child.
Mm.
It
For sure, for sure.
no,
But how did it affect how did it change the way that you felt
no,
about yourself?
I don't know if it changed anything. It just gave me courage. Just first of all, it made
Right.
me smile. That's the first thing.
Right.
But not only
Right.
that, I spoke about this at a kenneth when I was one of the key speakers, and I made that letter public because I
Mhm.
felt that it was because a lot of shluchim go through that. They
Mhm.
I remember once Rabbi Gutnick said he had prepared a whole evening for it. One woman showed up. So the
Mhm.
Rebbe says, well, you only needed one woman for Moshe Rabbeinu to be born.
Right.
Everything is the way
Right.
you look at it, no?
Right.
But um, when I told this letter, uh, different shluchas told me that they got encouragement from it.
Sure, for
That
sure.
just because they don't see immediately the results of what they're doing, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be. It doesn't mean that it's not worth it. It doesn't mean that you won't see the results, and so on. The Rebbe became Rebbe on Yud Shvat. The Rebbe he accepted to be the Rebbe on Yud Shvat. 3 weeks later, Rosh Chodesh Adar, my brother got married, and the Rebbe officiated at his marriage. This was the first Siddur, first officiation of the Rebbe. Uh, So we were in New York. I was 12 years old. My mother and I went in on Yechidut, a private audience with the Rebbe. The Rebbe started to speak to me, asking, can't remember what. I didn't say a word. He
Mhm.
turns to my mother and he says, she doesn't understand Yiddish. My mother started to laugh because my parents only spoke Yiddish to us. Okay, I didn't speak. He was speaking to my mother. My mother asked the Rebbe about my third brother. I don't even remember what the question was. She asked what he should do in a specific situation. And the Rebbe told her. And my mother's answer to the Rebbe, these explicit words, she said it in Yiddish, I'll say it in English. If his king, if his melech says that, that's what he will do.
Mm,
I remember standing there, mother called the Rebbe Melech to his face, and he didn't blink an eye.
mm,
It was the most natural, normal thing. I was 12 years old. I was stunned. And I told, there's a Hayom Yom that the first Yechidus you have with the Rebbe, this is a simon of your relationship to the Rebbe. And I
mhm,
told my girls, from that day on, he became my Melech. He's my
mm. Right. Wow. The time is running, but I want to ask you, looking back at your many, many years on Shlichus now, do you see the fruits of your labor?
say it again. Do I see?
The fruits of your labor. Do you see that
Oh,
planted
Kenai
vineyard?
and Hoda. When I came to Italy, when we came to Italy, I was only the third woman to cover her hair. There was the wife of the shochet, she covered her hair, and there was a woman, she was actually from Antwerp and married or something, and she also covered her hair. I was the third one, and people looked at me like I was nuts. I mean, I was a young
Mm,
20-year-old, and I'm covering my hair. Today, beli ayin hara, beli ayin hara. Whenever there's a simcha, whatever it is, I never count how many women are there. I count how many sheitlach are there. Today, for the girls to get married, and it is natural and normal for them to cover their hair, that beli ayin hara, there are kenayin hara, kenayin hara, kenayin hara. Nothing is missing today in Milano. If you want kashrus, if you want schooling, if you want friends, if you want clubs, if you whatever you want, believe Ayanhara you can find. It's a very vibrant, living community. And the secretary had said to me, start with a school. That way, your students become your collaborators. You see that Rov over there? He was on my knees in kindergarten. You see that Rov over there? He was also on my knees in kindergarten. You
mhm.
see the owner of the ice cream shop? He was in my. When I walk into the ice cream store, Mora. That's how they greet me. Okay,
Wow.
Mora. I much prefer the being called Mora than Rebbitzin. Okay,
Mm,
I love being a Mora. And can I the school our high school is the only one in the world outside of Eretz Yisrael that has a bagrut. The only one. When you graduate from our high school, it's as though you graduated in Eretz Yisrael. Okay,
mm,
um, there are hundreds, b'li ayin hara, hundreds. I mean, even I started. I started the school, or I started first. We started camp. Like I said, we were there 8 months. The school started I started the kindergarten, but the school by years ago. I started seminary. I was 67. This is going to be our 20th year of seminary. Okay,
unbelievable.
and I didn't want to make us. I said my husband very quietly. He used to I said, well, who's going to send their kids to Italy for a seminary? Okay, okay. I made a seminary. Beli Ayin Hara. Beli Ayin Hara. And I like I said, I want these girls, for instance, to come out of seminary seeing the beauty of being Alpi Shulchan Aruch. Not that you feel the yoke of the mitzvahs, but the beauty and how it liberates us and what it means to us.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
And they
Thank you. Thank you so much,
thank
Mrs.
you
Garelik.
for having
And
questions.
your youthfulness and you should continue, your strength and youthfulness to continue to 120.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
so
very
much
much.
for everything that you've done, and thank you. May you continue to have good strength and health
Amen.
and continue on in your beautiful work that you're doing.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Wow, it's always so fascinating to interview people from who are older, who have experiences from a previous generation, a previous time period that we might not be familiar with. I found it so fascinating that Mrs. Gorelick grew up in America in a time when there was so little Yiddishkeit, so little Judaism. As she explained so well, her father with a beard was something that was so completely unheard of in those days. And yet she grew up in a way that she was so proud of what she was, even though she was so different. There was probably very few people who were Shomer Shabbos, who kept Shabbos in her community. And yet she grew up with a certain pride. And she explained that the reason for her was just the support that she felt, the love that she felt of those around her. And I think that's something so crucial that we give our own children and our own those that we love, that love and support in being who they are, so that a person could really be who they are and be singled in doing their mission, and yet not feel like an outcast, and not feel like they're not being a part of the crowd, or not feel that devastation and not being the popular crowd. But when they have that support and when they have that self-esteem of who they are. And I think that theme ran throughout her life, even later on when she was in Milan and starting right all over again in the community there. I also really enjoyed how she described her relationship with her husband, how she looks at the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, as a romantic, something that enhances romance. That's something that teaches us how to live with one another, with our spouses, in the most beautiful way, in the most refined and beautiful, close way, but in the way that God really wanted us. And finally, another point that really stood out for me was how she wrote that letter to the Rebbe, feeling like she was just not up to it when she had blanked out after giving a talk in Lugarno, how she wrote to the Rebbe how she didn't finish the task, and how the Rebbe told her that the one who chose you knew what he was choosing. Um, in other words, and perhaps that's just a message for each and every one of us. There's so many times when we feel like we're not up to the task, and the challenges that we're confronting just seem so overwhelming. And perhaps we could just remind ourselves that the one who has chosen us for this task, our God, our Creator, who put us in our situation, knows exactly what He's doing, and we can handle it. And sometimes we see the seedlings grow immediately, and sometimes it does take a long time, and sometimes perhaps we never see it, but there's a reason for what we are going through. If you enjoy watching these videos and watching these interviews, I hope you are subscribed to Chabad.org/extraordinary. You can find us on all podcast platforms as well. You can see us as well on YouTube. Please make sure you subscribe to our channel there if you're watching it there, so you can get notified when the latest episode drops. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear your feedback, love to hear your comments on this or any other interviews. And thank you so much for being part of this extraordinary community.